I was, thinking about Final Fantasy VII. In the New Procrastinators podcast, there's, me in it, and then there's Nate and Jesse, two of my friends who love Final Fantasy VII as when they was a small person, and they played the original game, and now there's a new one out. And they, as soon as they heard that there was gonna be a remake, way back in, 2001, or wherever they said that, they thought this was a bad idea, and it was doomed to be a bad idea. And then in this podcast that came out, they talked about their first experiences playing the remake, and, it's mixed. Some parts are quite nice, but certain things really frustrate them. And, there's a whole thing on the internet, because it's remakes always being a big fucking thing, and there's the people who've never played Final Fantasy before, the people who've never played the original before, but they could have, but they didn't, so now they can get into it now. There's fucking this and that, there's just a lot of discourse right now about Final Fantasy VII, and I was thinking, what was I thinking? I was thinking about the reason that, Jesse and Nate have the frustration of certain things being wrong, or the story being told, or the story being different or worse. And not always, but there's some sort of a sense of preservation of the game as they remember it. They would prefer people just play the original because that's the one they know and that's the one they like. And this new one changes things in a detrimental fashion in some cases. Some cases they do improve the story a little bit, but overall, things generally tend towards being, different in a bad way. And, you can argue for millions of years about whether or not something is a bad or a good addition. Ultimately, there is no objective, truth, to something, but it tends to be that when a story is first made, everything that goes in, or a game, or anything, a film, is first made, everything that goes into it is made to service the same vision. And if you remake it with different people, or people who forgot what, the original production was who did work on it at the time, they come back, they're older, they're different, it's fair to say that if changes are made, they're more likely going to not make sense with all of the other things that are there. In Sequelitis, Aaron Hansen's Egoraptor's thing, Castlevania 4, he makes a point that a sequel can be ungraceful, or Castlevania 4 is an ungraceful sequel, because it carries over things that don't mesh with the new mechanics. It still has the throwing axes and the holy water, even though in Castlevania 4, the whip can do all of the jobs that those pickups, those items, used to fulfill. Back in the old days with Castlevania 1, 2, and 3, you have your very small whip. You can upgrade it to a longer whip, but it has a very specific way of whipping enemies. And all of these items add to your combat ability. They do things that your whip can't do. They go in an arc, they go up and around, they go down, They attack enemies in a way that your whip cannot. They are additions to your combat lexicon, or whatever the fuck, to your arsenal. But in Castlevania 4, they still have those items, but the whip can now also do those functions. So getting an item and holding onto it feels less important, and they're just they're less important things. So it's ungraceful, not quite as elegantly designed, because they carried over an element that has no real place. They just carried it over because. So that is just a general trend. You expect a remake to have a few screws loose, and a few unfitting parts, and maybe a few story elements that sort of don't go anywhere, because they're carried over from a game that had them, and, generally speaking, that's what happens. That's beside the point, actually. I don't know why I said that. The point was that there's a sense of preservation for these games. Video game be the way it is when it comes out the way it is. If it became a smashing success at the time, there are a number of factors that cause that to be the case. One of those factors is that there's no other way to play it, and so the way that it was played at the time must be good because everybody likes it. But there is also the context of where, what timeline of video games it's in. Did Final Fantasy VII come out when all of these modern games came out? No. It came out at a time where it was the most looking great game there'll be. It was the coolest fucking thing of all time, and everybody loved it when it came out, because everything else that was out was, comparatively comparable, comparatively. Yea, verily. Like, that was what it was. The point I'm getting at is that there's two angles. One is that in order to get the proper experience, like the groundbreaking experience of Final Fantasy VII, you really need to be there when it came out and be the right age. This is the thing that is hard to explain, and it's an unfortunate truth that somebody who picks up Final Fantasy VII, even if they play it on the correct hardware, the correct version of the game, and, maybe even if they're the right age for enjoying it, they may not enjoy it as much as Fortnite, It's just gonna be one of those things. I mean, types of people like different types of things, but certain things are just so broadly appealing and so good that Final Fantasy VII isn't gonna cut it in this day and age. So it's like, the idea, this magical idea that if Final Fantasy VII, the original game, was played in the exactly same way, like, say, emulated absolutely perfectly on newer systems so that people could play it, that still will not necessarily lead to people enjoying it the same way that the kids of the 90s enjoyed it. There's too many factors that need to be identical, and one of them is time, and, the timeline of the human race. So it's like, you can't recreate that magic in the exact same way. So a remake it's not a perfect solution, but it is something. It's interesting because context today also plays a point. I think a few years ago, when the PlayStation 3 was at its peak, and the PlayStation 4 was coming out, and the hot shit at the time in all of games was how realistically can we render a human skin and have like water droplets on their skin, and look at that. And it's like, it's less about video games at that point and more about hardware. And everyone was into it. Everyone was like, oh, I've always wanted to see like a realistic human face on a screen and then control them. Like, that was the quote-unquote goal from the beginning. As soon as PlayStation hit the market with three-dimensional things, and the Nintendo 64, and you could, put a shitty face, low-res image over that model, you're like, it's James Bond, it's GoldenEye, but he's not quite there. I mean, you can kind of see it, but, like, he's not really James Bond. I want to be real James Bond. If people made GoldenEye today, or rather, if people made GoldenEye in the era of high-res rendering, it would have been pretty cool. But I feel like, since that peak of the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, and high-res being the only thing that can really fucking sell, that's still around, but Minecraft and Fortnite and TF2 and things of that nature, more stylistic stuff has crept up and become cool again. It is cool to have something that is low-res and kind of weird-looking, and in this situation, I feel like a Final Fantasy VII straight copy would actually, like if it came out, would actually do kind of well. When the PS3 high-res stuff was at its peak, people would point to Final Fantasy VII and laugh at how they look like stupid Popeye things. Look at this fucking idiot. Haha, stupid Cloud, he's not realistic enough. We can make so much better realistic stuff now. And then we got bored of that because it adds nothing to a video game. We just sort of were hyped up about, rendering real big fucking pixels, small pixels, that is, and polygons in the millions. And we were like, oh yeah, that's really cool, and then we realized it wasn't that cool, and we would rather play Minecraft, which has no pixels, it has no polygons, it has nothing, there's nothing on screen, and we love Minecraft. It's just a square. You open it up and it's just one square, and that's all Minecraft is, and we fucking love that shit. And it was like, hey, maybe graphics are not the most important thing, because Minecraft is like the most popular game in the world at the time. Like, maybe it doesn't matter, actually, and maybe we should try and make video games that are good. And so, post-Minecraft, I feel like a Final Fantasy VII PlayStation 1 game could capture the hearts and minds of the populace and be, like, beloved all over again. But, I don't know, enough people still care about the high-res definition stuff. And to be fair, it's pretty cool, you know, looking at a table, and it's like, well, that table has got books on it, and you can see the titles of the books. There's a cup. It's got liquid in it. I mean, what the fuck? That's got liquid in it? What are you talking about? What are you doing? I rambled and I forgot what I was saying, so fuck it.